Hezbollah signals that Wednesday's operation that killed 2 Israeli soldiers is the only retaliation for the alleged Israeli attack in Syria, but reports from Iran and Syria suggest otherwise. Jordan demands proof that its pilot held by the Islamic State group is still alive before continuing the prisoner exchange. Their hope is to release both him and a Japanese journalist. And international efforts mount to halt the crisis in eastern Ukraine. EU foreign ministers meet while Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko calls for urgent talks. Now a new round of negotiations is set for Friday in Minsk. Good evening and welcome to the news today. And we begin tonight with the Israel-Lebanon border still reeling from a Hezbollah attack yesterday that left 2 Israeli soldiers dead and another 7 wounded. The militant group made clear that it was retaliation for an alleged Israeli strike on Quneitra the week before. But it has drawn strong rhetoric from the Israeli prime minister and promises of a response. Meanwhile, though, Hezbollah did seem to signal today that the escalation has reached its peak, with a major speech to be delivered by leader Hassan Nasrallah tomorrow, its backer Iran seems to be sending a different message. And with military preparedness high on both sides, the UN Security Council itself met today on diffusing the tension. We'll go to our correspondents in the field on the Israel-Lebanon border, Shai Ben-Ari, Julia Ganancia, and Amjad Abu Arafeh. But first, let's take a look back.
איראן היא זו שעומדת מאחרי ההתקפה עלינו אתמול.
The Iranians and their terrorist allies are working to build a new terrorist base in southern Syria, just like the one they have in Lebanon.
وأعتقد أن هذه العملية البطولية قد وضعت حداً لنتنياهو لمستقبله السياسي.
We support Israel's legitimate right to self-defense and continue to urge all parties to respect the blue line between Israel and Lebanon.
נמשיך להגן על עצמנו מפני כל איום, קרוב ורחוק כאחד.
And with me on set tonight is Colonel in the Reserves, Erez Winner, former aide to the IDF Chief of Staff, and Iranian politics analyst Meir Javadan-Fal. Gentlemen, good evening. Thanks very much for being with me. So there were a few quotes in the clip that we just saw that I'd like to go to in a moment. But first of all, we have Hezbollah sort of signaling it's reached its peak. This is the end. We don't want further escalation. Yet some reports from Iran, a sort of feeling, also quoting Syrian sources, that more is to be expected. Who should be believed?
Well, I think, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. You have to see what happens over the next coming days. What we have right now is a calm. The calm has returned to the border. Iranian press generally today referred to what they saw as a Hezbollah victory, that Hezbollah can reach Israel, and also that Israel was unable to stop the missiles that hit the Israeli vehicles yesterday. In one of the reports, they quoted a Syrian pundit, military pundit, who said that more would follow. But overwhelmingly, I didn't get the message from reading the press today or from the statements that Iran is really interested in the escalation at the moment, unless, of course, something unexpected happens.
So, interested in the escalation, I want to take that point to the Israeli side. Let's go back, first of all, a week, because like in almost everything in the Middle East, there's a context and everything is a reaction to another action and so on and so forth. The alleged Israeli strike in Quneitra, Syria, that killed 6 Hezbollah operatives, maybe another 6 Iranians. Why would Israel carry out this attack now? Why sort of awaken the sleeping bear?
Well, as we say, of course, everything is allegedly, but two major reasons. One is the basic reason why to carry out such an attack. As a second is the opportunity. The first is, as you just show in your report, Hezbollah, all together with Iran, building up new front in the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. This is something that Israel said loud and clear, and I think very logically, that she will not bury. Now, this patrol wasn't there just for skiing in the snow in the Mount Hermon. They were there as part of preparing this front. The Jihad Mounier, it's a very famous name, but he wasn't the number one Hezbollah man who was killed in that event. With him in the car was the commander of the Hezbollah troops in Lebanon. And this man was in charge of building the Hezbollah bases in the Golan Heights.
I want to get to this in a moment, to exactly who was in the car and if they were that good of a target that it was worth it. But first, let's go to our correspondent Shai Ben Ari, who's at the Israel-Lebanon border tonight, as he has been for a couple of days. Shai, good evening. I understand there is an inquiry already underway into yesterday's incidents. What can you tell us about that?
Right, Nurit. Quite a few details have already emerged from this IDF inquiry into the incident which happened here. Right, we are at the entrance to the village of Rajar, and this is more or less where that incident took place yesterday. We're talking about an incident where about a group of around 5 Hezbollah fighters approached the Lebanese side of the border, what Israel considers to be the Lebanese side of the border, near the Sheba farms here, and from there opened fire with a number of anti-tank missiles, firing 6 missiles in the direction of an IDF convoy, which consisted of 5 vehicles. One of those missiles actually hit the first vehicle in the convoy, a D-Max vehicle in which were sitting a 25-year-old major, the company commander in a Givati brigade, and as well as his 20-year-old driver, a first sergeant. Both were killed. Once this happened, once that first vehicle was hit, the rest of the soldiers in the convoy actually emerged from their vehicles, though the barrage actually continued with another Jeep in the convoy being hit. It was empty at the time that it was hit, and another missile actually hit a house inside the village of Rajar, which is more or less near where the 5 Hezbollah fighters were firing from, quite a distance away, it has to be said. 3 other missiles missed, but that is what has emerged from the inquiry into this incident.
Shai, on the more sort of personal side, you've been there a couple of days, as I mentioned, talking to residents, along with looking at the military buildup. Of course, we always know that Israelis are sort of used to this kind of escalation. Is that the sense now, or are they prepared for something that might be a little bigger?
Right. Well, you know, first of all, I would say there's a sense of relief that this winding down has now been achieved, and apparently this round of violence is behind us. That is certainly the sense that we've been getting a hold of, talking to residents here, also, among them also Druze residents of the Golan Heights, who are relieved to have this behind them. But basically, when you talk about the situation here, I think a lot of people are understanding something new in regards to Hezbollah's conduct in this latest conflict, this latest round of violence, perhaps a little different from what we have seen in the past, a little more caution, let's say, even in the statement, or not necessarily a statement, but the message that was conveyed to the Israeli side over the past day or so, that there is indeed an intention to wind things down from the Hezbollah side. That takes a totally different tone from the kind of brash statements that we are used to hearing from this organization, as well as the very fact that all of the violence or all of the fire was more or less directed in the area of the Sheba Farms, the Hardov area, as well as perhaps the Golan Heights, with other mortars being fired in that region. As opposed to other areas along the Israel-Lebanon border, which is a fairly extensive border, there's a clear message in that fact that Hezbollah avoided targeting other areas, in fact signaling to Israel that it has no intention of basically escalating the situation into a greater conflict. This is because, of course, Hezbollah has a lot on its mind. It is very heavily involved within the Syrian civil war, as well. It also has an almost separate conflict against the Islamic State, which is actually leaked into Lebanese territory, mainly around the community known as Arsal in southern Lebanon. Now, we were able to speak with a number of residents of this area, and we have more about that in the following report. A tense quiet prevailed Thursday along Israel's northern borders after both Israel and Hezbollah signaled their intentions to bring the latest flare-up to an end. Wednesday's incident, which saw 2 Israeli soldiers killed by Hezbollah fire, as well as 1 Spanish UN soldier killed by a retaliatory Israeli artillery strike, occurred just outside the village of Rajar, which is divided by Israel's border with Lebanon.
In the meantime, everything is calm, but yesterday was very difficult. We were home, we couldn't leave, the kids were stuck in a shelter at school, and today they didn't even go to school.
I'm not naive to think that the game is over. I think the challenges with the Hezbollah will dare attempt attempt to cross the border to Lebanon with a new advanced technology. And I think the Iranians will try to rebuild their terror infrastructure in the northern part of it within weeks or maybe months. So I'm sure that in these border, Israel will continue to face challenges with the Iranians and the Hezbollah. There is no question about it.
Elsewhere, life was returning to normal. The ski site at Mount Hermon, which is surrounded by military positions, was reopened Thursday morning. The ski site here at Mount Hermon is located right alongside the Syrian border. Over the past 3 days, this site has been evacuated twice, with mortar shells falling not far away. Today, the Israeli authorities have been eager to convey a message of back to normal. But it seems many Israelis are remaining cautious. Less than 100 visitors were counted here today, when normally more than 1,000 are expected daily at this time of year. Some took advantage of the situation.
It's amazing here because now it's empty. So we can be here alone and without anybody around.
The people who work at this ski resort are eager for business to get back to usual as quickly as possible. Snow season in Israel is short, and if they don't make money now, they don't make money, period.
If the situation will be back to normal and there will be no tension on the border, it will take several weeks for this area to recover. Right now, I think tourism in all of the north and the Galilee is hurt.
For now, it appears this latest round of violence is over. But the fears of those living along Israel's northern borders persist concerning what is being planned on the other side and what may be happening below the surface.
So I suppose if the ski resort having a tough time, maybe the worst result, this will be the best conflict Israel has ever had with Hezbollah. But speaking seriously, I want to talk for a moment about your own sort of military experience, because here in the Middle East, it's known that Hamas and Hezbollah are very different animals, different capabilities, although both formidable. We're more familiar maybe from the summer with the sort of war with Hamas. When you're talking about Hezbollah, you served in your military service along this border, this meeting point of Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. What does this terrain look like? What are we dealing with there?
Well, the Lebanon... Since Hezbollah started to rise in the beginning of the 90s, has built with Israel a very delicate sort of relationship. I know this border, as you said, for many, many years. I had the privilege to fight there, not the Hezbollah, the Fatah terrorist in late 80s. I even was wounded in Hardov, not far from the places that this event happened yesterday. Alongside with Givati soldiers from the same battalion, the Tzabar battalion from the Givati brigade, lost their battalion commander in that event. But since Hezbollah rised and was firing against Israeli civilians every time he felt something is not convenience, Israel has carried several of operations in South Lebanon. And eventually there has built some sort of understanding. Hezbollah allow to fire against Israeli troops, not against civilians, as long as they fight Israeli troops.
Is that why we saw this here?
Till May 2000, it was easier because we were in the South Lebanon. After May 2000, we saw in Hardov, very, very short to this event from yesterday, attack and kidnapped of 3 soldiers from the engineer corps. That later on their body was returned, and Israel didn't retaliate. It changes in 2006. 2006, Hezbollah again, by the leadership of...
Kidnapping in Israel seems to change the game completely.
The kidnapping of the 3 in 2000 didn't change because Israel was deep involved in the big riots in Judea and Samaria then and couldn't open another front. In 2006, Prime Minister Olmert, General Chalutz, initiated a big war, the Second Lebanon War, and since there, it changed. Nasrallah said after the war that if he would know that this will be the retaliation of the Israeli forces, he wouldn't do it.
Kidnapped them
and since 2006, that's what we saw. And that's why what we see now is allegedly Israeli attack, retaliation from the...
So you think it is a cautious response, like
I
our
think that it's a
China
cautious response. They were lucky enough to, and unfortunate to us, to kill 2 of our soldiers. They made a big fuss out of it, and as mentioned before.
So we're talking about comparing 2006, the Second Lebanon War, which for Israel was a failure, I think we can say, in terms of perception, maybe?
Not today.
At least after the fact, a little bit of an IDF internal look at itself, maybe. If Hezbollah then was, as Colonel Winner describes, how are they now when they're involved in Syria, when they're fighting for the Assad regime? Are they just as willing to enter confrontation?
I think for Iran, it's a question of priorities much as it is for the state of Israel. I think for
it's funny
Iran,
that when I ask, I think it's telling that the Iran expert, when I ask about Hezbollah, you respond with Iran.
Of course,
it's one and the same.
Well, the old saying, there's no such thing as free lunch. The Iranians have provided hundreds of millions of dollars to Hezbollah, training, weapons, everything else. It's for a reason. I'm not saying that Hezbollah is a complete puppet of Iran. No, they do have some of their own legitimacy in Lebanon, no question, with the Shia. But they, on big operations, I'm pretty sure that they consult with the Iranians. I think for now, right now, Iran is a priority of number one, the nuclear talks, not to make the situation too sensitive in becoming involved in a war via Hezbollah. But also there's another priority, and that's maintaining Bashar al-Assad. Iran has probably spent more on Bashar al-Assad than they've spent on Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah's organization. And if Bashar al-Assad right now becomes, there's a massive war between us and Hezbollah's pulled away from protecting Bashar al-Assad's assets and towns he's holding.
So he wants all their efforts focused on one place, in Syria.
It's a question of priorities, and I think both sides are now looking at the priorities, and I'm sure that the Hezbollah also, which is on the one hand is more battle-hardened after fighting in Lebanon, in Syria, excuse me. But on the other hand, I'm not so sure that they were looking forward to a huge fight against Israel either at this very point. So I think all sides looked at their priorities and are trying to not to enter into a war.
For now, they seem to have come out of it relatively well.
But
things considered.
But in the Middle East, unexpected things happen.
And
we were sitting here
tomorrow.
Many times. We were saying that the Hezbollah doesn't want a war, and guess what happened? Allegedly, Israel attacked, and not so allegedly, we became involved in a tit-for-tat operation. So bar the unexpected things, which is always in the Middle East.
And expect the unexpected.
I think, but generally, with the caveat of the unexpected, I think we're looking at the situation where both sides are deciding to just leave the boxing ring for the time being.
So we're talking about an escalation that maybe neither side wants. This is another thing we've seen very often, as you mentioned, where in the end we see a conflict or a full-out war that originally it seemed that neither side is actually interested in.
But Nurit, I think what's very important for Israel is two things. Number one, of course it's important that we don't become involved in a war because we have other priorities. But the question is, how do we enforce the message that Israel will not tolerate a Hezbollah base in Syria as well? How do we convey this message? How will Hezbollah, because General Winner said that they're going to rebuild again. Then what was the point of this alleged attack?
So if you were still in your position, if you were an aide to the IDF Chief of Staff today, how would you advise him? How far would you go to send that message that Meir is talking about?
Since, as I said, after the Second Lebanon War, Hezbollah didn't start anything against Israel, at least in the front. There were all kinds of international events, trying that most of them managed to stop, beside one attack in Bulgaria. And Israel, time after time, either it's allegedly or by its name, attack the Syrian forces and the Hezbollah forces, mostly in Syria, attacking weapon convoy, mysteriously killing of all kinds of leaders. Mounia was mentioned before, Salman, who is a Syrian general, but supporting and buying weapons for Hezbollah. So Israel was the one that has trying to inflict what happens in Lebanon and Syria. And we always thought and try to believe that they won't retaliate because they don't want to change the rules of the game. When you play such a delicate game, as was mentioned
it's
before,
a very fine line.
The lines are always are getting thinner and thinner. Eventually, you cross this line. So what will I advise? I will advise that we'll do the same, but think twice before we'll do it again.
Because you never know when crossing the red line might be too far. Let's for
but
a
again,
moment.
If you don't want another front to open, it's not just to talk about it. In the Middle East, you talk by the rifles.
By talk with guns. Let's join to this conversation then Hamad Awidat, who joins us now from the Israel-Syria border, a reporter for Iranian Press TV. Mr. Awidat, good evening. Thanks for being with us again. So we've been talking here a lot about Hezbollah and Iran, as we have for a few days, about Iran's intentions. Let's begin with that. Is Iran interested in an escalation via Hezbollah?
You know, I can't tell you that it's interested or not. It's the Iranian business. It's, you know, and we can't imagine what's going to be. Just what I believe as a journalist, that we have to wait up to tomorrow, 3 o'clock afternoon, to the speech of Hassan Nasrallah. Because I think that there he will have some surprises or some speech, and especially he will talk about what happened yesterday here in the northern side of the country. The Hezbollah or Hassan Nasrallah, he will talk in the name of the Iranians, and he will talk in the name of the Syrians, and he will talk in the name of all of these team together. So we can't know what's going on there in their kitchen, what I can say, and what they are doing now. And what I read today, and I followed the newspapers and some of the people that they are following for Hezbollah, all of them, they didn't say anything. All of their Twitters, it's not, they didn't write anything there, and it was a surprise that since the operation here, you know, since what happened yesterday here, you know, they didn't wrote anything there on their tweet.
If Hezbollah is being cautious, like we've heard being said a couple of times, would you say, does it seem to be out of not wanting to get into an escalation with Israel, or rather being too involved in Syria to actually be able to invest the time? What is its end goal?
I think that the fights didn't stop, you know, and the firing didn't stop, and it's just the start. Especially because I don't care what all of what they say, you know, and when they took the responsibility for yesterday, Hezbollah. But I care for the number one that they say there. It's, for me, it's big issue, and we have to think about it. And number two, maybe it will be the speech. Number two will be it should not be a military fight, and it should not be rockets here in the area. You know, maybe it will be some videos or some documents, you know, that it will have effect on Israel more than rockets in the northern border.
Last question. I just wonder, actually, we never sort of talk about popular support. We do when we talk about Hamas, but not about Hezbollah. How would you say, sort of in the last couple of years, especially with the Syrian civil war, the popular support for Hezbollah is?
You know, Hezbollah now, since 2 years, or since he succeeded, or let's say like this, since he succeeded to free from the prisoners from the Israeli jails, he get a support double than that time before. Why? Because the Arab world, there's no leaders in the Arab world, you know, there's no leaders that they are doing what they say. Hezbollah is known, and everyone believe in him. It's also the Israelis, you know, also the Israelis, they know there in Tel Aviv that what Hezbollah say he's doing, you know, maybe it will take a time, but he's doing. But the other leaders or the other presidents or organizations in the Arab world, you know, they are just lying for their people.
Hamad, I'll stop you just for one moment because I want to give Meir, who's in our studio, a quick chance to ask you a question as well.
Hi, Hamad. Have you seen any articles lately in the Arabic language press condemning Hezbollah for supporting the Bashar al-Assad regime, which has killed 150,000 Arabs, the very same Arabs that Hezbollah claims to defend?
Yes, I saw and I read and I am following it, you know, especially the people that they are writing these articles, and they are guests almost every day and every night in the TV stations, the Arab TV stations. But what I know and how I study this kind of characters and this kind of people, they are not talking because they have a conflict with the Israeli state here in the Middle East. They are talking because there is a conflict now between the Shia and the Sunnah and the Alawis, you know, and they don't like Hezbollah now just because he's with Bashar Assad, and because and they are trying to give him this sticker that he's fighting because he's a Shia or because he's following to Iran. They didn't know until now that the connection between Hezbollah and Bashar Assad or the Syrian government or the Syrian army, it's not Shia, it's not Alewi, and that's the mistake that everyone's talking about.
Yeah. I'm sorry to stop you. We don't have too much time left in the studio, but thanks very much for being with us tonight. I'm sure we'll see you again here in the studio soon. Before we continue, Meir, does that surprise you, what he has to say?
To be honest with you, the part where Hamad said that it's not because it's Shia and Sunni, I think I have to disagree there. Unfortunately, in the Arab world, in this region, we have enough problems with nationalism before, but now it's come down to the sectarian violence that we see. It's actually getting worse. But, I'm sure Hezbollah before were popular, but if you look at the funeral of Jihad Mughniya, it wasn't such a big event like it was when his father.
Certainly nothing for his father.
Perhaps because until then, Hezbollah on the one hand talks about all these years defending Arab people, on the other hand, Hezbollah is the doorman of the biggest butcher of Sunnis in contemporary history. So that's kind of difficult to match, to say how can they be popular when they are actually supporting somebody who's killing so many Arabs.
Right, and you never know what's true popularity and what's a sort of forced popularity. But let's circle back to Israel for a moment. Benjamin Netanyahu has, of course, been using a fairly strong rhetoric that Israel will respond. We asked Israelis on the street today if they think Israel should respond. As he said, let's see.
The citizens of Israel must defend their country, yes, of course.
With might and power, and even without blinking. Stop being afraid, because this is the security of the state of Israel.
In my opinion, we must create a deterrent to avoid such situations.
I think Israel needs to proceed and never stop.
No answer is the right answer. It's complicated. That's all I can say.
Absolutely not. As a northern resident, I think they responded proportionately. What they did until now is nonsense. But setting that aside, as a northern resident, I can say that we can cope well, also without any response.
I think Israel should react if Hezbollah will make more things like he made yesterday.
Well, because it would create an escalation and nothing good is going to come out of it.
Well, gentlemen, unfortunately with that we're out of time, but I'll just take one of the comments on the street. It's complicated, for lack of a better word. It is extremely complicated. Colonel Winner, Meir Javed Anfar, thank you very much for being with me. I'm sure we'll see you soon, and stay with us 2 minutes, and we're back. Don't go anywhere. Hezbollah signals that Wednesday's operation that killed 2 Israeli soldiers is the only retaliation for the alleged Israeli attack in Syria, but reports from Iran and inside Syria suggest otherwise. Jordan demands proof that its pilot held by the Islamic State group is still alive before continuing with the prisoner exchange. Their hope is to release both him and a Japanese journalist. And international efforts mount to halt the crisis in eastern Ukraine. EU foreign ministers meet while Ukrainian President Poroshenko calls for urgent talks. Now a new round of negotiations is set for Friday in Minsk. Welcome back to the news today. We begin now with the Islamic State group. A tense face-off has gotten underway between the IS and Jordan and Japan, whose citizens have been held hostage, namely a Jordanian pilot and a Japanese journalist. Now a potential prisoner exchange could be next. More from I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira.
Caught between international interests to defeat the jihadists and the demands to set them free, 2 hostages, Japanese journalist Kenji Goto and Jordanian pilot Muaz El-Kasasbeh, are still waiting for salvation. Earlier this day, the extremist jihadist group Islamic State released an audio of Goto with a dramatic message to the Jordanian authorities.
If Sajida al-Rishawi is not ready for exchange for my life at the Turkish border by Thursday sunset 29th of January, Mosul time, the Jordanian pilot Muaz al-Kasasbeh will be killed immediately.
For now, it seems all cards are held by the Jordanians, who have Sajid al-Rishawi, a failed suicide bomber associated with Al-Qaeda. Amman said today it is waiting to see a sign of life from their pilot before it frees Sajida.
Jordan is willing to exchange Sajid al-Rishawi with the Jordanian pilot Muad al-Kasasbeh. At this point, we want to emphasize that we have asked for a proof of life from Daesh.
In the meantime, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said his country is involved in the negotiations to release Goto. Earlier today, Abe said his country will not give in to terrorism.
I cannot give particular details. The government has, due to this very difficult situation, been asking for assistance from the Jordanian government. We will continue to make all possible efforts so that Mr. Goto is released as soon as possible.
This is perhaps the first time the Japanese Prime Minister is challenged by a hostage crisis. He is also at the center of a public dispute, especially after IS released a video last Saturday allegedly showing the brutal killing of Goto's cell partner, Haruna Yukaya. Now the whole world will have to wait to see if the two hostages are dead or alive.
And joining me now from Erbil, Iraq, is journalist Hermione G. Hermione, good to see you back here.
Hi, good evening.
So I want to go from the IS hostage situation first to Kobani after finally a little bit of good news with Kurdish forces managing to push IS out of Kobani. Has that had a ripple effect in Iraq in terms of morale, in terms of a feeling that IS can be combated there?
Absolutely. I mean, people have been celebrating since the news came that Kobani has finally been liberated, the city of Kobani at least. Let's remember that there are still hundreds of villages surrounding Kobani that are still under control of ISIS, although the YPG Kurdish forces are making inroads into those villages as well. Certainly it's been very, very good for morale, but people are also warning that we shouldn't think that, you know, the battle is now won. ISIS still controls something like 50,000 square kilometers of Iraq, 30% of Syria. So people are celebrating, but they're also aware that, you know, there's still a long fight ahead. The city of Mosul, for example, is still fully under the control of ISIS. So it's good news, but it's not, you know, it's not over yet.
Hermione, you've reported to us several times about the feeling amongst the Kurdish forces that the airstrikes are helping, that the arms are helping, but that they're very far from being enough. Where does that stand at this point? How are Kurdish forces faring in Iraq?
Well, they've had several victories recently, which has, again, been good for morale. But we're also still hearing calls. People are still calling on the international coalition to add troops on the ground. They're saying, yes, the airstrikes have been very helpful, but all they've managed to do thus far is essentially paralyze the ISIS, which is very important. It means they're not mobile, they can't move around the country, they have much more difficulty getting in heavy weapons and so on. But they haven't left. They're still here and they're still occupying certain areas. So we're still hearing calls for troops to join the fight along with the
Is there
coalition.
a sense of living in fear there amongst all the residents?
To a certain extent. I think people are now concerned that the militants, as we've been seeing slowly over the last few months, are going to start changing their tactics. They're going to revert to their kind of guerrilla tactics, unconventional warfare. There's certainly concerns in Erbil, in Kurdistan, about increased, let's say, car bombs, suicide bombs, hostage taking, all of these things. Luckily, we haven't actually seen much of that recently, but people are definitely worried that the tactics might change and that we're still under threat here.
As we just discussed earlier in this edition on Hezbollah, expect the unexpected in the Middle East. Hermione G, for now, thanks very much for this.
Thank you.
And we stay in the region in the same sort of subject, but in Moscow. It's the second and last day of talks between over 30 members of the Syrian opposition and representatives of the Assad regime. The stated aim for the opposition was to first hammer out common demands and then present them to the regime. But several of the insurgent groups in the fight, including the key opposition group, the National Alliance, aren't there. Many of them claim the talks are just another boost for Bashar al-Assad. And joining me on set to perhaps make a little sense of this is Avi Melamed, Senior Fellow at the Eisenhower Institute, Middle East and Intelligence Analyst. Avi, thanks for being with me.
My pleasure.
So what I've heard at this point from the Syrian talks concluding is, I think not surprisingly, no clear result, and we will meet sometime in the future. First of all, who is the Syrian opposition that was there?
Excellent question.
No one knows.
I'm not sure that the Syrians themselves know. Look, the Syrian opposition, at least when you're talking about the more, let's say, the nationalist affiliated one, I'm not talking about the Islamist affiliated one, has always been a jumble-mumble of different groups and subgroups and inner politics. Nobody really knows. There are dozens of different groups that basically stands under this umbrella called the Syrian coalition or the Syrian opposition. And in fact, we are talking about a body that is totally split. It's not a real body that has a real authority to make the decisions and to move forward. We had we had a lot of experience in the past basically showing that this body, in the end of the day, come with zero results. I think that the more accurate way to look at what's going... By the way, there is a very interesting thing that right now in these very days when this show actually is going on in Moscow, something interesting, more interesting in my mind happening, but it's in a different part of the world, which is much more closer to here. It's a place called Egypt. The Egyptians host another delegation of the Syrian opposition, which is very interesting for a couple of reasons. First, it's basically a message saying we are not participating in the show in Moscow. This is one thing. The other thing, which is very significant...
And that we're going to be a big player.
And they're going to be a big player. And the other thing, which is very significant in my mind, is that the Egyptians are taking now much more proactive, relatively speaking, position in the context of the Syrian war, which is something that relatively thus far the Egyptians have restrained or refrained from dealing with.
Why now then?
I would say there are a couple of reasons of that. I think that the major one is the attempts of Sisi to position himself, again, not only as an Egyptian leader, but again as a national, regional leader. I think it's being done with a full cooperation with the Saudis, and it's happening more or less with the same conjunction when there is a new king in Saudi Arabia,
right,
which I think is very interesting.
And in a very quick word, positive or negative, the new king in Saudi Arabia, how is that going to push?
It depends who you ask.
Yeah. For Assad, let's say.
I don't see any kind of dramatic change in the position of the Saudis. I think that the most important thing that happened in that context, talking about the new foreign policy of the Saudi Arabia, which to my best of the evaluation is going to be more or less the same one, the more interesting thing was to see this convoy of the most senior leaders of the United States of America coming to Saudi Arabia to meet the new king, right, which is a very interesting signal.
Dignified group of people, including President Obama.
Which is a very important signal.
This is another issue altogether that we need to have you back on. For now, Avi Melamed, thanks very much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And we move now to somewhere else where talks are happening, may or may not, with having good results. Gathering in Brussels today, European Union leaders ordered their foreign ministers to prepare to expand sanctions against Russia after a surge in fighting between Kiev and Kremlin-backed rebels. I-24 News reporter Shachar Peled has the details.
A new round of sanctions on Russia is back on the agenda. EU foreign ministers arrived in Brussels for a meeting Thursday to discuss how to respond to the new rebel offensive in East Ukraine.
We have seen the increased fighting in Ukraine, and we are very much concerned about the situation and also by the continued support of Russia to the separatists.
Russia continues to deny backing the revolt, thus fearing opposition to the broad new sanctions from parties such as Greece's new government, which has close ties to Russia. The Ukrainian foreign minister emphasized the need to step up the pressure on Moscow.
We have clear understanding that another heinous terrorist act could bring about the whole spiral of violence in a totally different direction.
Kiev and local officials said 6 civilians and 5 Ukrainian soldiers were killed in the last 24 hours. The attacks follow a rebel advance launched last week, which killed 30 civilians in the city of Mariupol and appeared to have ultimately buried the frequently violated truce. In an additional attempt to address the collapsing ceasefire, Belarus announced that a new round of Ukrainian peace negotiations would be held on Friday in Minsk. However, the 2 earlier sets of Minsk agreements, which called for the creation of a 30-kilometer buffer zone between the warring sides' armies, failed to make any progress and were soon followed by new fighting, leaving very little hope for both sides of the conflict. Meanwhile, the fighting over the last 9 months has killed 5,000 people and caused more than 1 million residents to flee the ongoing battered area.
And now from Ukraine to economy. And joining me is financial analyst Lionel Freidfeld. Good evening,
Good evening, Lorraine.
So let's talk about Greece, another big element in the EU these days. You have, since a new prime minister very swiftly came to the helm, sounds like a lot of countries are feeling very, very worried, including even China, that Greece might renege on reforms. What's going on right now?
Exactly, because Greece has a lot of debt, 175% of the GDP, which is approximately 300 billion euro.
Wow.
So it's huge. So Greece wants not to repay. They will have to renegotiate with the Troika. The Troika is the European Central Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and also players. And the question, are they going to pay? Are they going to negotiate? It's one question. The second question, and the consequences of that, stock market crashed in Athens yesterday, especially banking stocks minus 27%. Today there is a rebound with 6%.
Something that I think, at least I always wonder, the common man sort of wonders, about debt, massive debt that countries hold. When you have the average citizen, if I had $1 million debt to the bank, certainly they wouldn't let me off the hook. Is it possible for Greece just not to repay its debt? What would happen?
It happened. It's happening to all the countries in the world, because if Greece is not repaying the debt, it's going to have a systemic risk on the European Union. But the problem with Greece now is that they're going back on their engagement. And if you take the example, the Greek government decided to freeze the privatization of the Piraeus port in Athens. Okay, in 2008, COSCO, which is the largest, the Chinese maritime company, bought for 3.3 billion euro for 35 years the concession of the port. And today they want to expand. And no, the Greek government saying no, we're not doing the second part of the privatization. So the issue is instability in financial market, in the way doing business, and that's the main reason why Standard & Poor's, gave credit risk, the note of the Greek debt is B, but now it's put on a watch list, and it's expected to be downgraded at the beginning of the month of March.
So just economically speaking, what the new prime minister is doing, these anti-austerity measures, are they smart economically? Will they actually help Greece?
Greek people had a lot of pressure from the International Monetary Fund, the European Unions, and the European Central Banks. But it's not a proper way to handle things because, anyway, they have 300 billion euro debt. It's not going to come to zero. It looks like the debt will be rescheduled, in a couple of years. But what is important now is to create value. And you create value when you attract investors and international investors like Chinese investors.
And I imagine now is not the best time for Greece to be attracting a host of investors. Lionel Freidfeld, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We move now to Argentina. Argentine prosecutor Alberto Nisman is being buried today. But he leaves behind a string of burning questions that are alive and well, to say the least. Nisman died hours before he was to testify about an alleged government cover-up of the 1994 Buenos Aires bombing. And all indications show the story is far from being over. Here's I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira with more.
Hundreds of people gathered in Buenos Aires to pay their last respects to Alberto Nisman, the general prosecutor killed in mysterious circumstances a few hours before he was to present testimony to the Argentinian Congress on the alleged involvement of top officials in the 1994 bombing attack on the Jewish Community Center, a terror attack which left 85 dead.
I'm really sad for Argentina. I cry for Argentina, and I hope that this will never happen ever again.
As Nisman was buried, more and more facts surrounding his death were being uncovered. On Wednesday, a man named Diego Logoramsino appeared on camera and said he loaned a gun to Nisman a day before he died.
He told me, I'm more afraid about being right than being wrong.
The death of the leading prosecutor of what looks to be one of Argentina's biggest international scandals still preoccupies its leaders. Earlier this week, President Cristina Fernández Kirchner decided to take extreme measures after she posted an update on Facebook saying she believes Nisman was murdered. The president, accused by Nisman for covering up Iranian involvement in the 1994 bombing in order to maintain economic ties with Tehran, then went farther.
I have taken the decision to dissolve the Intelligence Ministry and the Federal Intelligence Agency.
Prosecutors of this case said this week they have yet to establish whether Nisman was murdered or committed suicide. Now, when the flames refuse to die, Kirchner may pay the price with her chair of office.
And with me now from Buenos Aires is journalist Rayan Hindi. Rayan, thanks very much for being with us.
Hello.
So I want to ask you, after Nisman's death and after the journalist who uncovered his death first fled the country, is there a sense of outrage in Argentina? Is there a sense that this story really is not over?
Yes, definitely. I mean, this affair is far from being over. It's still major headlines everywhere. Everyone's talking about. Obviously, there's a sense of anger, but there's also a sense of confusion where information just keeps coming every day, and information comes in and contradicts yesterday's information. It seems that everyone's here with his own theory. The government's accusing one person, the other one is accusing the government, and I mean, so there is more of a sense of confusion more than anything here. Obviously, we've seen some scenes of violence yesterday, especially, for example, when the courier delivered 2 huge arrests with messages of condolences from the government. The angry protesters torn apart the flowers and trampled the ribbon and scanded "Assassin, assassin."
Ryan,
obviously now...
I just want to ask you, so President Kirchner in the beginning, she seems to have played this very bizarrely, to say the least, first saying that it was a homicide, Nisman's death, then that it was definitely a suicide, and then moving to dissolve the intelligence agency. How are people seeing this? Is she believed at this point?
Well, the thing is, Cristina has a very large popular support of almost 50% of the country, and politically the country is very divided. So there is it's a lot of people made a comparison with the Venezuelan case where there's a really strong support on this, and she's playing obviously on the idea that this is some kind of something to take her down from. I mean,
a personal attack.
She's been saying a personal attack on her person. Yes, obviously, and yes. So many people are believing this, and others are going against. It's very hard to know because, as you've been saying, she's been coming back and forth with different explanations, and especially now dissolving the intelligence agency.
Ryan,
I mean, that's a move.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. Ryan Hindi, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And we move now back to Tel Aviv. On the morning of January 21st, a Tel Aviv bus became a scene of carnage, as it has many times before, unfortunately, when a 23-year-old from Tulkarm in the West Bank got on board and launched a stabbing attack that left 12 people wounded. On the front line was bus driver Herzl Biton, who was badly wounded himself. Today, I-24 News correspondent Matthias Inbar sat down with him as he recounted every minute of the attack.
Suddenly I felt someone standing over me. Wham, 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 stabbing. I look in the mirror, turn my head. The same guy who yelled, ooh, ooh, from whom I took 50 shekels. Maybe he was upset. I asked him, why are you touching that? Why are you pressing that? It never occurred to me he was a terrorist. He began stabbing me like this. Suddenly I see blood flooding my shirt. I look in the mirror and he suddenly shouts, Allahu Akbar, slaughter the Jews, and goes from one to the other with a knife and a screwdriver. He stabs in this way in his seat, another time, another stab, another seat, stabs, moves forward, stabs, and I see in the mirror, I say, I have a terrorist on my bus. The knife and the screwdriver do not fall from his hands. It's like they were stuck with glue, as if a magnet is holding them. I jumped out my seat, took the tear gas, grabbed his hand, and began to spray his eyes, his face, his nose. I also got some. My eyes began to burn. The gas was close. I left the tear gas, the pepper spray, and began, boom, boom, 2 blows to stun him. His nose began to bleed. I began with my fists, kapow, kapow, in his eyes, his nose, his face. At some stage, I'm still holding his hand like this, with the knife that was no longer stabbing him. I give him another blow. He apparently slipped from the amount of blood that was there. He stabbed me here and began to run after Larissa. You have to neutralize him. Even if I get another stab, either I or he does not get out of here alive.
And the details of what happened, what we just heard the bus driver recount in the Tel Aviv attack, are starkly missing for Malaysia. Malaysia has officially declared the disappearance of flight MH370 an accident, and all of its passengers and crew presumed dead. The search for the missing Boeing 777 will continue after it disappeared from radar on March 8th of last year, after taking off from Kuala Lumpur en route to Beijing. It's believed to have gone down in the Indian Ocean far off the western coast of Australia. The formal declaration will allow victims' families to continue the compensation process with the airline or with insurers. And moving to the White House, the trip is over, but the controversy continues. U.S. First Lady Michelle Obama left her head uncovered as she and President Obama met King Salman in Saudi Arabia earlier this week. Her decision has drawn attention to the severe restrictions placed on women in Saudi Arabia as the president defended America's complicated relationship with the country. I-24 News reporter Shachar Peled explains.
The Obamas are back from their foreign trip, but what happens abroad doesn't necessarily stay there. U.S. President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle cut short their visit to India this week and arrived in Saudi Arabia to pay their respects after the death of King Abdullah. The American First Lady drew attention with her decision not to cover her hair during the visit to the country, which observes a strict dress code, although it was not unusual.
The attire the First Lady wore on this trip was consistent with what First Ladies in the past have worn. First Lady Laura Bush, what Secretary Clinton wore on her visits to Saudi Arabia, Chancellor Merkel on her visits to Saudi Arabia, and including other members of the United States delegation at the time.
The decision also caused a stir on social media and prompted the hashtag Michelle Obama Not Veiled.
Thank you, Michelle Obama, for standing up for women. Now we can also tell them that lashes and beheadings are not okay.
Woman's open and direct message to Saudi authorities is worth much more than her husband's words.
Indeed, President Obama came under heavy criticism for his act of solidarity with the Arab autocratic rulers only hours after lecturing India on tolerance and women's rights.
When women are able to work, families are healthier, communities are wealthier, and entire countries are more prosperous. And when young women are educated, then their children are going to be well educated.
The Saudi kingdom is known to be heavily criticized for its strict gender segregation and biting Sharia laws, which ban women from driving and require them to wear headscarves and loose black robes in public. But the U.S. is anxious to maintain the Saudi-driven oil price reductions and the regional cooperation against violent Islamic forces in the area, criticized both at home and in New Delhi, where local commentators questioned U.S. double standards. Obama continues to face diplomatic headaches as he aims at cementing strategic partnerships in a volatile region.
And now to sports. And with me is host of the I-24 News Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev. Thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
Much needed athletic relief after IS and Greece and the EU.
That's what we're here for.
So I understand you're also here for making the rest of us feel extremely lazy.
This competition, it's insane. Running a marathon is hard enough. Running 7 marathons in a week is crazy. Running them in 7 different continents, I think it's insane. Insane, but 12 people...
It makes me feel better that you think it's insane.
It is insane. We're seeing the 12 competitors here, 11 men and a woman.
These are not exactly, good marathon conditions.
Yeah, and just running 1 marathon in Antarctica, that's hard enough. These people ran a marathon in Antarctica, Chile, the US, Spain, Marrakesh, Dubai, and Australia.
In how
within
long?
a week. Within a week. So that means that the only time they had to sleep and eat was on a plane. Airplane food. No, a seat on the plane. I never knew
airplane food was good for exercise. So
well, they did finish the race. They were happy when they finished. Extremely exhausted. Are we all feeling lazy after seeing this? I would say yes. I do. Absolutely.
I'm sad to say, though, I don't think a marathon is coming my way, even one anyway, as lazy as it makes me feel. How about the Australian Open?
Tennis. We finally have the women's final. It's set, and it's the classic final. Number 1 against number 2. Serena Williams against Maria Sharapova. No doubt, these are the best.
A big match.
Yeah, these are the best female players in the world today. You know what? There's not even a favorite. I can't point to one to say there's a favorite. We're seeing here Serena Williams. She beat Madison Keys, a fellow American, in the semifinal. Serena won the Australian Open 5 times, but the last one came in 2010, so she has plenty to
I have to say,
show.
I probably shouldn't say this to a sports guy, but tennis is the one sport I actually truly enjoy watching. The others, not less.
There's something about it. It's lovely. It's nice. Everybody likes it. Everybody seems to like it, and it's very interesting. It's colorful. I love it, but maybe I'm not the right example. But then we're seeing Sharapova and Serena Williams. That will happen Saturday morning. Big game, Sharapova against Serena.
And it wouldn't be Sports Today without some football. I understand someone got a little kind of consolation prize.
Yeah, Manuel Neuer, he was named as one of the three final candidates for the Ballon d'Or, but when the other two are Messi and Ronaldo, you will not win it. No chance. But he did get some consolation, as you said. What was that consolation? A wax statue of his figure in Madame Tussauds Museum in Berlin. Neuer had a fabulous year. He won the World Cup with Germany. He won the German double with Bayern Munich, the cup and the championship. So he deserves it. He deserves it. And this is a guy who.
That's incredible. That the statue. I mean, I'm sure his playing is as well. But the statue, I have to say, is amazing.
And you know what he said? This is a professional athlete. He said it was very, very hard to pose for his wax statue. He said you have to sit there for 3 hours and they paint every hair and every little thing there is on the face.
But then he gets to be immortalized.
That's true.
Forever and ever.
He will be
Jonathan
there forever.
Regev, thank you very, very much
for
this. And that's it for us for now. 2-minute break and we'll be back with the Daily Debate, Israel Elections 2015. Don't go anywhere.